Okay, this has to do with the online study group, Barry Harris Harmonic Method for Guitar by Mr. Alan Kingstone. I'm going to put this little preface or preamble in front of the video that I made because in viewing the video a few times I realized that I stated that the diminished chord is, or many of the diminished chords in the different families were usable over the dominant chord, and perhaps I wasn't clear about that. They are not sounding as diminished, but they can be altered and used over the dominant chord. I believe I was in B, I believe, and what I was suggesting is that the relative diminished on the third is, of course, going to spell the chord for us as a 7 flat 9, but its major diminished, which is going to be found on the 4th tone, is usable when altered. So perhaps I didn't make myself clear about that. I see these now as diminished chords that are altered, and there are certain positions that I didn't view before as diminished, altered, to be used over the dominant. So this is just in an effort to avoid any posts or comments that would say, well, you're using a dominant 7 flat 5 over, that's all you're doing. Most of the study in the book is about us seeing different chords in different ways graphically on the fretboard. And so it's with that intent that I did make some statements. I just wanted to make that clear before we get into the video. Okay, thanks. Okay, this is in reference to the online study group, Barry Harris Guitar Method by Mr. Alan Kingstone. And the original thread started by my friend Mr. Rhett. There haven't been many posts in a while, so I thought I would weigh in. I've been sidetracked with a few things, but now I'm free to get back on the topic. And before I do that, I'd like to agree with the original poster about the density of certain posts. You know, I'll scroll through a 4-paragraph post in a New York Minute without reading too much. So I guess that's just the way some people have to express it. But one of the reasons I purchased this instrument was to sit in front of the computer to decipher some of those posts without having to worry about banging it up against the computer desk. I wasn't going to use my my better instrument for that. But anyway, there is a saying that goes, if I had more time I would have said less. Well, some people don't practice that, I guess. But in any case, the subject matter that we're up against here was put forth by a post from, I think I'm checking my notes here, Mr. Sean Z, I think it was. It had to do with the diminished, or all the diminished chords that were associated with the dominant. So I'm going to go with the key of E major that the original poster likes to work in. And anyway, the question is the B7, the diminished, all the diminished from everything associated with the dominant. How is it possible that all these dominants can work? And I'll just weigh in with my opinion or how I get it squared away in my mind anyway. The one way I look at it is the original key of the dominant, in this case is E. I'm going to call it diminished that's associated with the E6 diminished scale found on the major 7th. I'm going to call that the major diminished, just for argument's sake, in order to distinguish it from the relative diminished that goes with the dominant. So the major diminished is found on the 7th, the 2nd tone, the 4th tone, and the flatted 6th tone. I find to locate the diminished on the fourth tone is helpful. If I'm in this key, I simply go over to the fourth. I know I'm dealing with the major diminished. If I'm considering, in this case, the B7 chord, I go to the fourth. And in the diminished seventh scale, I know I'm dealing with the major, on the fourth, I'm dealing with the major diminished. So that's just a signpost for me to help spot all of them. So the question put forth by Sean Z is, how is it that this relative diminished, here found on D sharp, B, can work as a substitute when it happens to land on the third, the fifth, the seventh, and the flatted ninth? One of the first diminished I think any of us learn. How is it that that's a substitute? Well, we know it's a substitute. It spells the chord. It spells, in this case, it spells B7 flat 9. But then the diminished scale associated with this, the major diminished, falls now on the one tone of the scale. So how do these two diminished work together? They're only a half step away. And we have yet another diminished that's associated with the minor 6 on the flatted 2, in this case C minor 6. And then the minor 6 on the 5, here again, it has its major diminished, but it happens to be common. It's common with the diminished that's associated with the scale on the minor 2. In this case, C, and we have F sharp minor 6. Okay, so we have lined up 3 diminished that are associated with this dominant. And I believe that's how the question went in Sean Z's mind. He couldn't understand, or it was a misunderstanding of that as well. To keep it straight in my mind, I take the relative diminished that's found on the third. I associate that with the dominant. Anytime I play a dominant or I want to use a substitute, I will go to the third. And of course it's inverted anywhere. But I see this chord as actually spelling the dominant as a 7 flat 9. The next one up is the one associated with the 6th dominant 7th scale. This diminished would require an alteration. And I would go to the dropping of the 2 voices that we were discussing in a previous post. The 2 non-sequential or non-consecutive voices. In this case, it's the bass and tenor. And for me, that spells out B9 augmented. That's how I see that diminished as working with the dominant. The next diminished, which would fall on the C minor 6, now on the 4th, we now have F diminished. It's also common with the 6 on the 5. In this case, the F sharp minor. I see these diminished, or this diminished family, as acting on the tritone of the dominant. And just as we altered the other voices, here I have the major diminished associated with the minor 6. In this case, F sharp minor 6. And I've altered the soprano and alto and soprano voices. Now I see those diminished as acting on the tritone of B7. While the other one is acting on the actual dominant itself. Here's the one, the relative diminished, and the diminished associated with the dominant. here are the other two diminished associated with those substitutes, the flatted 9 and the minor 6 on the 5, altered. That wasn't very clear. Sorry. So that's how I distinguished the two different families. But all of the diminished do work. You can use them. Some need alteration, of course. But in thinking about this, I would say that this is more or less, as the whole essence of the book puts forth for us, it has to do with movement, the one voice leading to another. So if I was to consider a movement such as a 2-5-1 in this key, E, so 2 beats on the 2, 2 beats on the 5, and 4 beats on the 1. I would consider what Dr. Harris has told us to completely disregard the number 2 chord and consider it to be 4 beats on the number 5 chord. So I would go to the 5 chord immediately, in this case B7. I would go to the 6 on the 5, F sharp minor 6. I might choose its inversion and its major diminished. That's one inversion along with its own diminished. Then I might go to the 2, in this case inverted. Then the relative diminished of the dominant. And perhaps an inversion of one of the substitutes on the flat 2. I know Mr. Rhett likes this one. So there I've used more than one family of diminished. Sounds like this. Or so here I've started with an inversion of the minor 6 on the 5, used its major diminished. I went to the 2 chord, inverted. Now I've used the other family of diminished, the relative one associated with the dominant on the 3rd. Then to an inversion of the substitute, the flat 9 substitute, and finally resolved to E6. All right, being on a roll here, I'll even extend my stay a little bit more. This is not off topic, actually, and it really is a favorite topic of mine, because when people post things, and on this forum there is another post put forth by, let me check my notes here, Y.A. Claus, I believe, Ya Claus. It's an old post. It goes back to 2016, I think it is. But the question was, what is the use of a diminished major 7th chord? So all we have to do is voice that in drop 2. Let's say C. We'll take a 5, G, and flatten it. And then we'll add in a major 7th B, and the 3rd flattened, which would be a diminished chord with a major 7th. Now, after studying Mr. Kingstone's book and applying borrowed tones and whatnot, this particular voicing becomes obvious to many of us who've gotten that far in the book anyway. all you need to do is reach up into the strings series 1 through 4, and you can see that it's a diminished with a borrowed tone. Sorry, borrowed the wrong tone. There we go. Diminished with a borrowed soprano tone. And it is, what is it now? It's a D flat 6. So it's the major diminished found on the 4th with a borrowed soprano tone from the inversion. Well, that to me is the source of this information, since our whole universe is the chromatic scale. In this case, it would be D flat or C sharp chromatic scale. This is the universe that Dr. Harris has given us, and this is the source. Now, all we need to do is take the soprano voice and move it over and take a look at that chord, and you can see that it's the dominant with a flat 9 and a 13. So you could, its function would be as a dominant over the tonic. Or you could see it as the tritone, sharp 9, with the 5 in the bass. You could spell it or read it that way. But this is the chord, and that certainly is the source of the chord. Okay, this keeps up. I'll never finish this video, but anyway, right after discussing that post or that thread about the diminished major 7, I was rummaging around and I found this chart, which I had acquired some time ago. It happens to be the verses to Gingy, and I did question some of the chords, some of the movement. Anyway, this was a while ago, long before I even discovered Mr. Kingstone's book, and I was questioning, of course, that F-6 sharp 5, and all you have to do is write out, I think I'll have a graphic there of the a snippet of the chart, and then I have another graphic I think I'll put up when I went to write the functional harmonics out. I do this all the time in order to help memorize the song, and all you need to see is anomalies like you have there with functional harmonics, with accidentals and strange harmonics such as the flat 6, minor 6 with a sharp 5. This is something that I guess would catch everyone's eye if you've had any exposure at all to figured bass and Bach chorales and things. These are a red flag that indicate a modulation or something going on there. And so anyway, after having written out it's and taking a look at it in this manner, I just simply formulated an F-6 and inverted it, putting the 6 in the bass, and taking the C, which is the 5, and sharpening it. And there, it's our old friend, what we were just discussing. And that's, it happens that on the chart, it's not voiced that way. It's voiced with the, I think the C sharp is on the top. But anyway, when I questioned this, the person who gave me the chart said, well, that's Joe Beam. He's out there, and okay. I'm not questioning Carlos Jobim and his harmonics, the manner is. But I just, of course, I wanted to be able to play something. And I was, since this portion of the verses was in A, I assumed it was an A major 7 to an F sharp And okay, I got away with the D major 7. But then I wanted to go to the so there it is, it's transitioning into the song, which goes into the key of C. And certainly it's our old friend there, the tritone. I mean, here it is. Okay? Which goes right into the main portion of the song. So those are the kinds of things that catch my eye all the time. And I'm glad that through Mr. Kingstone's book, we're able to at least make these discoveries of the source of this. All right, I just thought I'd vent that for a second. Okay. Okay, I did want to make one more observation without a demonstration. It's really in the form of theoretical understanding or attitude. And I notice when we study pages 30 through 36, and Mr. Kingstone is suggesting home chords and away chords, and we have also diminished chords associated with those two groups, you would have to come to the conclusion that the diminished chord is the thing that's stitching these movements together. They're not acting as arriving points. If you have a diminished chord that's going to be associated with a home or at rest, and you're also going to have a diminished chord associated with moving the listener away, it's obvious that this has to do with movement. It has to do with moving the voices around to resolution. And it is the essence of the book. And I just thought I'd put that out for any comments.